from John chapter 9, verses 1 through 41. I have to say, I did a double take when I saw, is it really 1 through 41? And it really is. So here we go, the whole story. Walking down the street, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, causing him to be born blind?" Jesus said, "Oh, well, you're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. There is no such cause-effect here. Look instead for what God can do. We need to be energetically at work for the one who sent me here, working while the sun shines. When night falls, the workday is over. For as long as I am in the world, there is plenty of light. I am the world's light." He said this and then spit in the dust, made a clay paste with the saliva, rubbed the paste on the blind man's eyes, and said, "Go, wash at the pool of Siloam." Siloam means sent. The man went and washed and saw. Soon the town was buzzing. His relatives and those who year after year had seen him as a blind man begging were saying, "Why, isn't this the man we knew who sat here and begged?" Others said, "Oh, it's him all right." But others objected, "It's not the same man at all. It just looks like him." He said, "It's me, the very one." They said, "How did your eyes get opened?" "A man named Jesus made a paste and rubbed it on my eyes and told me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' I did what he said. When I washed, I saw." "So where is he?" "I don't know." They marched the man to the Pharisees. This day when Jesus made the paste and healed his blindness was the Sabbath. The Pharisees grilled him again on how he had come to see. He said, "He put a clay paste on my eyes, and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "Obviously, this man can't be from God. He doesn't keep the Sabbath." Others counted, "How can a bad man do miraculous God revealing things like this?" There was a split in their ranks. They came back at the blind man. "You're the expert. He opened your eyes. What do you say about him?" He said, "He's a prophet." The Jews did not believe it, didn't believe the man was blind to begin with. So they called the parents of the man, now bright-eyed with sight. They asked them, "Is this your son, the one you say was born blind? So how is it that he now sees?" His parents said, "We know he is our son, and we know he was born blind. But we don't know how he came to see. Haven't a clue about who opened his eyes. Why don't you ask him? He's a grown man and can speak for himself." His parents were talking like this because they were intimidated by the Jewish leaders, who had already decided that anyone who took a stand that this was the Messiah would be kicked out of the meeting place. That's why his parents said, "Ask him. He's a grown man." They called the man back a second time, the man who had been blind, and told him, "Give credit to God. We know this man is an impostor." He replied, "I know nothing about that one way or the other, but I know one thing for sure. I was blind. I now see." They said, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" "I've told you over and over, and you haven't listened. Why do you want to hear it again? Are you so eager to become his disciples?" Oh, with that, they jumped all over him. "You might be a disciple of that man, but we're disciples of Moses. We know for sure that God spoke to Moses, but we have no idea where this man even comes from." The man replied, "This is amazing. You claim to know nothing about him, but the fact is, he opened my eyes. It's well known that God isn't at the beck and call of sinners, but listens carefully to anyone who lives in reverence and does his will. That someone opened the eyes of a man born blind has never been heard of, ever. If this man didn't come from God, he wouldn't be able to do anything." They said, "You're nothing but dirt. How dare you take that tone with us?" Then they threw him out in the street. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out and went and found him. He asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man said, "Point him out to me, sir, so that I can believe in him." Jesus said, "You're looking right at him. Don't you recognize my voice?" "Master, I believe," the man said, and worshipped him. Jesus then said, "I came into the world to bring everything into the clear light of day, making all the distinctions clear, so that those who have never seen will see, and those who have made a great pretense of seeing will be exposed as blind." Some Pharisees overheard him and said, "Does that mean you're calling us blind?" Jesus said, "If you were really blind, you would be blameless. But since you claim to see everything so well, you're accountable for every fault and failure.
Right? John 9. Awesome. Cause and effect is one of the first things we develop. We know a little bit about it before we even walk, before we speak, before we can do anything. We know that if we do this thing happens. We can put that together even in the earliest stages of life. When I do this, Daddy laughs, and I like it when everybody laughs, and so I keep doing that thing, right? When I do this, it hurts. When I stop doing this, it stops hurting. We learn these lessons super early before we have words to put to the concept. And this develops in us. It becomes deeper, and it gets deeper and deeper in us that we develop an expectation that everything that happens must have a cause. There must be a reason behind everything that happens. It says a lot about us that the reason is very rarely our own bad decisions and almost always somebody else's fault. That's not the point of today's sermon. Not today. It is a sermon, but we're not going to go there. People with different expressions of and experiences in life spend their time looking for the reasons in very different ways. Some people look for all of the reasons and explanations for everything that happens in the world through the scientific method and mathematics. And there has to be a one-to-one cause and effect, a quantitative 1 + 1 = 2 sequence of events here. And they're trying to figure out that sequence. We've come a long way in understanding that the cause of a lot of the stuff that we do happens because of brain chemistry. And a lot of the time, actually for the most time in human history, stuff happens because a God did it. Right? For the longest period of time, sequentially, in human history, everything that happened had a divine reason, a divine explanation. God did it. If it was good, it was a blessing. If it was bad, it was a punishment. And sometimes it was just because God felt like doing it. And so our role, the role of the human being in that understanding of the universe and the world becomes to earn blessings, to avoid punishments, and to persevere with the neutral stuff that God just wanted to happen for no reason other than it's God. This is the understanding of the world behind the disciples' question at the very beginning of this story. Who sinned? What caused this man to be blind? Who sinned? Was it him or was it his parents? Those are the only two choices for the disciples. The blindness itself has to be a punishment for sin in their understanding of Scripture and the world. And it has to be either his or his parents, even though later scriptures in the Hebrew Bible said that God would no longer visit the sins of the father upon the generation and generation. But for the disciples, this man's blindness was, without a doubt, a punishment for sin, either the man's or his parents. The way the disciples understood the world informed by this kind of unimaginative, legalistic understanding of religion. Everything that happened everywhere, all the time, to everyone, and in everything happened because God willed it to happen. Their religion taught them of God's sovereignty over all things. Like I would stand up here and I just make the decision to drop this pen on the ground. It's because God wanted me to do it. I personally think that God has more important things to worry about other than whether or not I just dropped that pen. I I want us to understand three things by the end of our lesson this morning. No one sinned to cause this person's blindness. The healing of the disability was not the point of the story. And the Pharisees were mad because Jesus did the right thing in the incorrect way, the improper way. But the first thing we have to do is work through some ableism. I am saying the word ableism. Ableism. And ableism is to disability what racism is to skin color and ethnicity and a culture of origin. Basically, ableism believes that people living with disabilities are less human, less complete than an able-bodied person. That they are worth less, that they are less complete human beings because they have a disability. And just like racism, ableism is a culture in which we are raised. So it is not necessarily anybody's fault to read something through the lens of ableism. A fish does not know or understand that it swims in water. Right? We do not recognize that we are swimming in the waters of ableism and racism. It's not a personal thing. It's not, for some people it is. For some people it's not. It's not an individual choice. Sometimes it's not the fault of the individual. It is how we were developed to see the world. So it is our responsibility to learn how to see the world in a new way. In a way that honors and cherishes the complete individual humanity and dignity and integrity and worth of people with varying abilities. And to stop thinking that everyone with a disability must be worse off because they're not like us. The second thing we need to do real quickly is work on the Gospel of John's use of the word Jews. We talk about the other Gospels and other places in John. We have the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the chief priests and the elders and the scribes, right? The religious leaders, the religious people that are stuck in their ways and for the most part don't understand what Jesus is doing and saying, and they're stuck in their organized religion. John shortens that list to the Jews. It is easy to read anti-Semitism into John's language, but it's not there originally. So John it's shorthand, basically. For he doesn't want to say Sadducees and Pharisees and chief priests and elders and scribes every time. So he says Jews. That has been twisted. John's language has been twisted and used by hate groups. But it's not in the text itself. I mean, John is a Jewish person writing this, right? Okay, so let's deal with some of our ableist assumptions here. One of the things that ableism does is puts everything in black and white dichotomy. Everything in right and wrong, good versus evil. Dichotomy just means the conflict between two sides that are exactly opposite from each other, and only two sides of everything. And so here we read this in an understanding of light and goodness and being able to see on one side, with darkness and badness and not being able to see on the other side. Those things get equated. That's reading through a filter and a culture of ableism. When, in fact, a majority of blind people actually recognize the difference between light and dark. And they understand and they respond to this metaphor and these metaphors that throughout our language. The racism inherent in dark versus light, badness versus goodness, is another topic for another sermon. So there's 3 sermons coming out of this one story. But we're not going to go there today. So the majority of blind people actually do experience lightness and darkness. They know the difference, and they can find meaning in this metaphor. And this guy seems to be able to get around fine, right? I mean, it doesn't say anybody takes him to the pool. It doesn't say anybody leads him down. We assume that, he had to be carried and he had to be dropped in through the ceiling, like another story in Scripture. But it just says he went and he washed, like he did it, and he is maintaining his identity throughout this story. He's not saying I'm a new man. It's just I couldn't see, and now I can see. Like from the very beginning to the very end, I am that guy. I'm still that guy. And the only time the story uses the word astonishing is not the guy who was blind and who could now see. That wasn't astonishing to him. It was the Pharisees' behavior that was astonishing to the blind man, right? He was more amazed by the stubbornness of the Pharisees to listen to what he was saying than the miracle itself. I've told you 3 times what happened to me and who did it and how it happened, and you're not listening to me. That was more astounding in the language of the gospel than actually getting his sight back. So I want to be crystal clear about this. Jesus says right here, no one sinned to make this man blind. The reason this man couldn't see was something physical, something physiological, biological. We don't know what that was. But no one did anything wrong to cause it. It was not a response to any sin in someone's life. It was not punishment. It was not a test of faith. His optic nerves were detached, or his retinas were too small or too big. It turns out that actually putting together a living creature's body from the genetic material of 2 other living creatures' body is actually pretty difficult to do. And sometimes things get put together in different ways. The reason this man was blind was physiological, not theological. God did not choose to make this man blind and then put that decision into action. That is no longer our theology in the United Methodist Church. That is no longer my theology as a pastor. I dropped that pin because I chose to, and I thought it would make a good point. That's why. The pin dropped to the floor because of gravity, and gravity is a thing, and it works on everything. The pin did not fall directly through the floor because the molecules that the pin is made of are vibrating at a different frequency than the molecules that the floor are made of. Now, I've just lost myself. I don't understand any of that, right? We are all made of molecules that are in constant motion. None of us are solid when we get down far enough. But because those molecules are vibrating at different frequencies, we're not always constantly falling through our chairs. And walking through walls isn't a thing. We know the reasons for all of that stuff. We have found the answers. The man was not blind as a punishment for sin, and the man did not need to be healed because he was a less complete human being without his sight than with it. The healing benefited the man because of the culture he lived in, but that's a different thing entirely. The healing isn't even the point of the story. All of the action of the story, all the points made in the story surround the actual healing of the blind man, the actual miracle that happens. The disciples' question, the reaction from the neighborhood, the response of the Pharisees, those are the points of this story. They all just happen to be made within the context of Jesus healing a blind man. And that last sentence, man, whew. Jesus does his big reversal metaphor thing, right? I have come to make sure that everybody that sees will be blind, and everybody that blind will see. Does that all the time to everything. And the Pharisees say, surely not us, right? I mean, we see the world for what it is. That's what they mean. And Jesus says, because you think you see everything, that's where your sin comes from. So the neighbors try to say it's not the same guy. It's just some guy that looks like him. The Pharisees don't believe that he ever was blind until they talk to the parents, who still won't say it was Jesus who did it, because they'll know that they know already that they'll be cut off from the community if they admit that it was Jesus. And the Pharisees keep asking how it happened. They don't ever ask why it happened. They don't ever ask what the man is experiencing or how the man is feeling now, but how did this happen? Each one of these stories we've been reading throughout Lent, if we go back a couple of weeks, they've always had just one line that stuck out. Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night, and he's confused by Jesus' language of rebirth. And he actually says, you know, Jesus, it's not like I can go back in and get birthed again, right? And the Samaritan woman gets confused by Jesus' reference to living waters and says, you don't even have a bucket. How are you going to get living waters? This, and I saw some of you react to it. We're not supposed to read passive-aggressive behavior into the Scripture, but why are you asking about it so much? Oh, you must want to follow Jesus, too. I mean, that's unbelievable. I've already told you. Why are you so interested? Oh, do you want to follow him too? I could put in a good word, right? You must be really into Jesus too. That's why you keep asking about it. And they go off on that. They get madder than they ever were. But why were they mad in the first place? What made the Pharisees mad in the first place? Why was this such an upsetting thing for the religious leaders? How did this happen to you? 3 times. 3 times, how did this happen to you? Let's be clear. They weren't mad because it happened. They were mad because Jesus made it happen. They were mad because Jesus made it happen and they didn't. They were mad because to make it happen, Jesus broke their rules. Jesus did the right thing the wrong way. The incorrect way, the improper way, at least. He healed them on the Sabbath. He can't be a man of God, right? Even though he healed a blind man. But he can't do it because he broke a commandment to do it, right? I mean, just such a good story. So deep, so thick. So I think for us, the work of this morning is to find ourselves in the story. Where do you find yourself in this scene? Who do you find yourself resonating with or identifying with? Are you in the incredulous neighborhood that says this can't be the same guy? This man who has experienced Jesus in his life and it has absolutely transformed everything. This cannot be the same person. It's just somebody that looks like him. Are you the parents who are willing to say the facts that he was born blind, but we don't know what happened? Because you are afraid of what might happen within your community if you admitted to how Jesus has changed things. can you go far enough to say, yeah, I have experienced change in my life, but fall short of saying, and Jesus made it happen? Because you might get thrown out of the community that you're in. Are you the Pharisees, the religious leaders, more upset about the breaking of the rules of your established order, whatever it is, church, culture, government, more upset about that, more focused on that than the actual miracle staring you in the face? Or are you a formerly sightless person whose eyes have been opened, patiently trying to explain to those around you and all those who ask what Jesus has done in your life and how Jesus has changed you and changed how you see the world and how you experience the world, and getting more and more frustrated by the people just not hearing what you're saying? The blind man said, the third time he was asked, look, I don't know anything about that. I know that at one point I couldn't see, and now I can, and Jesus did it. I don't, where he came from, who he is, what religion he is, what he belongs, the rules he broke. I don't know anything about that. I don't know what denomination this church is. I don't know what I know that I was hungry and I came to dinner and there was a plate in front of me and I got fed. I don't know anything about all that stuff that you're worrying about. People will not remember everything that you do for them. People will not remember everything that you give them or say to them. People will remember how you made them feel. Maya Angelou. So where do you find yourself in this story? Amen. We have an opportunity now to worship God with our financial gifts.